Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are on this rather cold day here in usual sunny Sydney. I'm in shorts and t-shirt at the moment, but I got the heater going as well because it is freezing here. As I said, thanks for joining. This is my M365 May session on how to ensure voice and video quality in Microsoft Teams. Just before we begin, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsors who have made this event possible. Without those sponsors, this event just would not be possible. So a big shout out and a big thank you to each and every sponsor on that list there. Also want to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which this online conference is hosted, and the traditional custodians of the land where our Australian-based speakers and participants are located. I'd also like to pay respect to elders past, present, and future. So a bit of introduction on who I am. My name is Craig Chiffers. I'm a Microsoft MVP who focuses on Skype for Business and Microsoft Teams. Now that comes under the umbrella of Office apps and services in Office 365. My day job is as a principal architect or solutions architect with a company called ICOM here in Australia. I'm also a volunteer firefighter, and I volunteer with an organisation here called the State Emergency Service. So when I'm not playing around with phones and meeting room equipment and Teams, I'm more often than not putting on the yellows or the oranges and helping out. In fact, right before this meeting started, the pager went for a fire call, but I unfortunately had to turn that one down because I've got to be here and do this. When I'm not doing those things, I try and get out on the motorcycle as much as possible. On a day like today, where it's 16 degrees in Sydney and it's currently raining outside at the moment, the bike stays where it is. For those of you that do ride, that's a Honda CB 650F. Love that machine. It's gotten me into a little bit of trouble. Maybe I've gotten myself into a bit of trouble on it, perhaps. But yeah, all good fun. Now, for those of you that have joined previous sessions for M365 May, there's competitions running throughout the entire month. So do yourself a favor, get your mobile phone out a moment, out your pocket or off your desk, open your camera app and just scan that QR code that's on the screen there right now. That will take you to a form, and the form will ask you which session you're in. And just be sure to mention this session, Networking Matters, how to ensure voice and video quality in Microsoft Teams. So I'll just pause here a moment and allow you to do that. That enables you to enter the as a whole M365 May competition. Gonna have a swig of my tea whilst you guys do that. All right, you done it? If you haven't as of yet, there'll be another opportunity at the very end of the slides to scan that QR code and enter yourself into the M365 May competition. There's lots of prizes to win. I believe there's headsets, books, busy lights, all kinds of things from our very kind sponsors. Just on prizes too, I'm actually running my own prize for this specific talk. So if you'd like to win a copy of Adopt and Embrace Microsoft Teams, here's the copy right here in my hand right now. I will ship this to you anywhere in the world, wherever you may be listening to. So if you'd like to win a copy of that, that's purely based for this talk today, all you need to do is ask a question. And to do that, you just use the Q&A feature, which should, in theory, be in the right-hand side of your viewing window there. Now, I'll be pausing every now and again throughout today's session just to check the Q&A. Ask anything you like whatsoever. I am moderating this session myself, so it's just me that will be answering those questions. So please feel free to ask them, and I'll try and get to them as we go throughout the session today. All right, so we're all here to talk about networking, but why does networking matter? It's not really a sexy subject, right? Networking isn't really that exciting. It's switches and routers and firewalls and cabling. Like, doesn't really get too many people excited, right? But turns out it's really damn important. And why does it matter? Well, first of all, it's what users use to consume Teams, right? And if they're using a poor quality network, it's going to lead to a poor quality experience in Teams. Just like driving along a road where the surface hasn't been repaired and it's full of potholes, makes the driver go, "Ah, bloody council! Where are they spending my money? They're not spending it on fixing the potholes on the bit of road that I drive on." Same thing with a network, right? If the network is of poor quality, it's slow, it introduces too much latency, packet loss, poor Wi-Fi coverage, you name it. If it's a poor quality network, all the user sees is that their experience in Teams is rubbish. And the problem with that is users remember those experiences, right? We typically have one opportunity and one opportunity only to make a good first impression with someone. Now, right at the start of this call, I would have made some kind of impression with everyone that's listening to this today, whether that's good or bad. Hopefully it was a good one. Same thing goes with your network, right? And Teams in general. If the user's first experience with trying to make a call on Teams is rubbish, they're going to remember that. And do you think they're going to trust the application to make important sales calls or call their boss or call customers? Maybe not. And lastly, you've got to remember that users have so many different options today when it comes to communications, right? I mean, you've only got to count the number of apps you've got installed on your mobile phone. I mean, off the top of my head, I've got Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter. That's literally the first three that appear on my home screen here. There's so many of them. I mean, I use an app called Zello as well to make calls. Of course, we've got Zoom, we've got Teams, we've got Skype, all different kinds of applications that the users can use to contact each other. And so if you're trying to shove one in front of them that doesn't work properly, what do you think is going to happen? They're more than likely going to switch to their phone and pick a different app that they know, they trust, and they know works well. Now, I did this talk probably about 2 or 3 months ago about why networking matters in a very similar style of live events, right? And I focused very heavily on the corporate landscape of the network because, I mean, traditionally, most users, generally speaking, about 90 to 95% of the user base would be consuming Microsoft Teams in an office environment. They're either connected to a local area network that the networking guys have rolled out and have control over, or they're using corporate Wi-Fi. And networking security teams, they have the ability to control that environment. You can control how much bandwidth each user gets. You control what ports to open on the firewall. You control how many access points are deployed on a floor, even what access points are deployed on the floor. Like if you want to go down the Aruba route or a different network or a different manufacturer, different controllers to manage that network. You had control over what the users were using, even down to the image most of the time that it was installed on the user's machine as well. So you controlled everything that the user touched and used to consume Teams. Of course, things change, and that's prevalent now more than ever. COVID has shown us that we cannot rely on the constant that things are going to remain as is, and we've really been shown that we need to be flexible in the way that we support our end users, especially when it comes to consuming those online services. I mean, lots of businesses, us included, were almost caught off guard when COVID, reared its ugly head and offices closed down, but business had to continue and people had to continue working, but working from a non-controlled environment, working from home, working from somewhere outside of the corporate office. And people were caught off guard, right? We had businesses, saying, we need to spin up more Citrix farms, or we need to, reconfigure our VPN tunnels so that we can deal with all of this traffic all of a sudden that's come from nowhere. A lot of people were caught off guard. So the service hasn't changed. Teams is still there. It's still in the cloud, but the way that people access that service has changed. And we can't just simply sit there and fold our arms and say, well, you're not using corporate Wi-Fi or corporate equipment, so we're not going to support you. You're talking about an end user base that has shifted entirely from being in a controlled, closed environment to being anywhere in the world. And we need a way of dealing with that. So, of course, we have control over many things in the corporate environment, but when we're talking about users who exist outside of that environment, what kind of things can't we control? Well, we don't typically have control over the ISP that they choose, anything to do with their home Wi-Fi, or if they're using 4G as opposed to their home network. Traffic that exists outside of our corporate network landscape, we can't really control that. Of course, comes down to the user as well, right? Like, we may have potentially recommended that they go out and buy a Microsoft Teams headset, but if they choose not to do that and they choose to use their iPhone headphones instead with their phone, that's on them. We can't control that. And of course, we can put out as many training courses as we like. We can, have sessions like this. But at the end of the day, if users don't attend them, then what can we do? We can't force them to attend these kinds of sessions. People are busy, right? People have kids to deal with at home, and their schedule's been thrown out of the window, and we're asking them to attend 2, 3, 4 day, sessions on how to use Teams. How's that going to go down? People, generally speaking, don't have the time for these things, right? So when we're speaking about good versus poor scenarios, in an idealistic world, if we're accessing online services such as Teams, we really want the best kind of experience, right? And so we're looking at those high-speed, low-latency networks. We're looking at using Teams-certified devices where possible. So your Teams headsets, your Teams handsets, and where possible, we want our users to be trained in how the technology works. Of course, not always possible. On the flip side, and most of the time of what we're actually dealing with, are users who are using Teams or attempting to use Teams on low latency, poor quality Wi-Fi. They're using 2.4 gigs at home. It's a Wi-Fi band that's super congested. Everyone's trying to use it at the same time. They're having a really poor experience. Or maybe they've given up on their home Wi-Fi and they've jumped over the 4G to hotspot from their mobile phone. And again, that's a congested network as well. And so they're having problems. Or they're using uncertified hardware and they're not trained on not only how to use the product, but also what to do when they encounter problems. What to do when they can't join a meeting because their network's congested. What to do if they're running late to a meeting. What to do if they need to reschedule something. How do they even reach the help desk to ask these questions? Now, of course, Teams does require a baseline to work properly. So, in an ideal world, of course, Teams would work quite well over dial-up, if anyone out there is still using dial-up, hopefully not. But there are some minimum requirements to get Teams working. Now, I've ripped this straight off the TechNet website, but for a peer-to-peer call, 30 kilobits per second isn't a whole lot of data, right? So for peer-to-peer audio, we can handle that on pretty much any connection these days, including 3G. Once we start jumping up to peer-to-peer quality video and HD quality audio and desktop sharing, that's where we start to see networks starting to get a little bit congested, right? Home Wi-Fi networks starting to become under the pump a little bit. Of course, if we're trying to do a HD video call involving multiple people, then we're looking at least 1 to 2 megabits up and down at the same time. Of course, if you've got multiple people in a household who are trying to do that at the same time, maybe on Zoom, on Teams, and consuming YouTube content and browsing the web, etc., that can really put those home networks under strain, right? Now, there are some firewall requirements that are required for Teams as well. Again, if we're dealing with a home situation, we don't tend to need to worry too much about firewalls because most people these days will have universal plug and play turned on their modems. They haven't gone in, they haven't edited any of those features, and so Teams will be able to open up those firewall ports by itself. However, if you are still pumping traffic via your corporate network, these are the required ports at a very bare minimum that Teams requires to talk to the internet. Now, some security teams will say, well, we don't want to open up 443 and 3478, 3481 to the internet. We want to lock that down, and we need to go in and specify the exact IPs and protocols. So if you need to do that, you can look at that aka.ms/Office365 IPs list. Now that list is regularly updated, so you will need a mechanism internally to monitor that page. Some people do it via RSS. Some people have written PowerShell scripts that will automatically pull that detail down from that site for you. One thing to note, though, is Microsoft are aware at the moment that that networking teams are potentially running on skeleton staff, and so they have paused changes to that list currently. There hasn't been an update as to when that will change, so keep an eye on that, because if the URLs and IPs do change and you do explicitly within your environment control where that data is going to today, you need to stay on top of that list, because if you don't, traffic will be trying to come from or go to an IP address that's been updated, and of course your traffic will be getting blocked, and then you'll have problems with Teams. Another thing to point out too, so a common question that I am asked is, Craig, we need to pump all of our Office 365 traffic through a proxy. Now, the short answer is please don't do it at all ever. Certainly not recommended. Now, back in the olden days, Microsoft's stance on this was do not use proxies. We do not support it whatsoever. Now, that stance has changed because proxy technology has come a long way since then, and we now do see proxies being sold that have Office 365 compatibility built into them. Would I recommend them? No, I wouldn't. And the reason for that is because you're adding additional hops, additional latency, and you're putting additional strain on that proxy server to handle all of those outgoing connections to Office 365. So not just for Teams, but also for Outlook as well. And Outlook, as you know, creates multiple connections to Office 365. And that proxy server would have to be handling each and every one of those. So would strongly recommend strongly recommend against using proxy servers if you can. That traffic does not need to pass through a proxy. It's already encrypted. All you're doing is double encrypting it. Of course, there are some customers out there that for PCI compliance or for any kind of compliance that you require in your country, they must force that traffic through a proxy. If that's you, then know that you are supported by Microsoft, but please do ensure that you're running a very, very up-to-date version of your proxy. Old proxies simply cannot handle that level of traffic coming through them. Very similarly to proxies, VPNs. Now, I started earlier by saying that a lot of corporations and businesses were caught off guard with people having to work remotely, and so they basically said, well, everyone is just going to need to connect in via VPN to access Office 365 and internal services. Just like a proxy server, a VPN will double encrypt that traffic. And not only that, but you're additionally adding obviously additional hops there, and you're routing that traffic internally via your corporate network, which obviously if you're trying to deal with hundreds of people at the same time, it's going to get constrained. So additional latency, additional hops, potentially issues with DNS, and a constrained internet connection all lead to, yep, you've guessed it, a poor Teams experience. So what you're going to do instead is you're going to configure split brain DNS or split tunneling DNS on your VPN. That will force your Office 365 connection requests to go right out straight across the user's internet connection. Anything that needs to go to your corporate network can still come down the VPN. That's perfectly fine. But your Office 365 connections, they should leave the user's computer out their local internet breakout and hit Office 365 as quickly as possible. That's the aim here. So please try and avoid VPNs where possible. Another thing that does trip people up is a DNS lookup. So the way that Office 365 works is it uses a global DNS system, so that when you look up, say, autodiscover.outlook.com or linkdiscover.yourdomainname.com, Office 365 looks at where you're coming from, and it will return your closest point of presence. So if you're in Sydney, Australia, it will return you the Sydney POP. If you're somewhere in Europe, it'll give you the Europe POP. And if you're somewhere in the US, it'll give you the US POP. What we typically see is if end users have configured their own DNS servers, say for instance to use Dyn DNS or Google DNS, or you're not using your ISP's DNS server, you may receive a request back from Office 365 for a point of presence that isn't close to you. So your traffic starts routing all the way via the US or all the way via Europe to access Office 365, when you could just be hitting your local point of presence here in Sydney instead. Of course, additional latency, additional hops equals poor experience. And I spoke about this before, but this comes down to hairpinning traffic across your internal network. So again, if you're forcing people to use VPNs, or you're forcing traffic even within your corporate network to go out a single internet point of presence, you may be experiencing that issue with returning the wrong POP back to the user for Office 365. Imagine a scenario for a moment where I'm sat here in Sydney, and we also have users over in Perth, some 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,000 kilometers west of where I am today. Now, if those users access Office 365 via our corporate network, they're having to come all the way across to Sydney and then out the Sydney POP to Microsoft and then come all the way back again. It would make much more sense if that user in Perth could access the Perth Microsoft POP or one closer to them out of their own local internet connection. So keep that in mind. Try not to hairpin traffic via your corporate network. Adds additional strain to your corporate network, additional strain to your firewall, additional strain to your proxy servers if you're forcing those connections through a proxy. This doesn't make sense, right? So allow the user where possible to access those services utilizing their own internet connection. Again, this comes down to security, right? So you already store these files up in Office 365. We've got to trust Office 365. That's where we're using the service from. So we need to access that information as quickly as possible, and that's only possible via the user's local internet breakout. Some of you may already have seen this tool. This is the Office 365 connectivity test tool. So if you go to connectivity.office.com, and you can do this in your own web browser now, you put in your current location, so where you are today in the top box there, and the website will tell you if you're connected to the right POP. So it looks at your DNS details and it says, yeah, you're in Sydney and you're connected to the Sydney POP, and here's the response time of that Sydney POP, and gives you a green tick and says, yeah, everything's good. This is a really good way of testing a user's network as well as your corporate network as well, to see if you've misconfigured DNS. If you download the version, the tool from this website as well, it gives you a more in-depth output of all the DNS requests that it's making, as well as it doing a network assessment as well on the network, which will tell you if you've got ports or protocols blocked as well. So if you've got a user that's experiencing slow connectivity times to Office 365, check out connectivity.office.com, run it on their local machine, and find out if they've misconfigured DNS or if there's a networking issue on their machine. All right, just check the Q&A. There's no questions so far. As I said, if you do have a question, just feel free to chuck it in the Q&A. Best question will win a copy of this, the Adopt and Embrace Microsoft's Teams book. Let's talk a little bit about the Teams end user experience and what it's like as an end user to use Teams and potentially experience common problems when using Teams, things that we all face at the end of the day. Firstly, though, you should know that Teams is built on the back end of Azure and has really been built from the ground up to deliver that enterprise-grade, flawless experience, regardless of whether you're using audio, video, or desktop sharing, or even live events, as we're doing right now. So a lot of times people will ask me, they'll say, is Teams a new version of Skype? Now, you should know that Teams has been written from the ground up. So they threw away all the code for Skype. They threw away all of the stuff that all of the code that Skype used to run on, and they started again. And they built Teams on top of Azure's media services, utilizing the global footprint of Windows Azure. And you can see via that global map there that the spread of Azure is pretty large, right? The goal with that is to be within 30 milliseconds of an end user's last mile. So that's an ISP. Regardless of what ISP that you use today, Azure's goal is to be within 30 milliseconds of that. What does that mean in real terms? Well, it means that when you're sending data up to Office 365, you want to have as little latency as possible, because anything above 75 milliseconds, the users are going to start to notice. Anything above 150 milliseconds, you start getting that weird experience where you both talk over each other and you keep interrupting each other, and then you pause and let the other person talk, but they do the same thing. And then you start talking and you end up with this kind of like, weird sort of conversation where not a whole lot gets done, and oh, sorry, you go. No, sorry, you go. No, sorry. So anything above 150 milliseconds is really a no-go area with real-time audio and media. So being as close to the user as possible is the goal here, and that is what Azure is trying to achieve. Now, of course, we don't always get it right. Things happen in the network layer where you end up with packet loss, you end up with delays on the network, you end up with jitter. Sometimes you just lose a network altogether, right? And Teams knows this, and Teams helps with this. Back in the olden days with Skype, when you used to have networking problems, Skype would throw up a bit of a cryptic message around, poor quality due to networking. Sometimes you get that yellow bar that would appear at the top of the screen. It would sort of generate a lot of help desk calls because users didn't really understand what that meant. Well, Microsoft understood that, right? And so they've now spelled it out very clearly within the client when the client detects that there's a problem. So you can see here that I'm having an internal call with Justin Omar, is one of my fellow colleagues at ICOM, and I can see that there's a red triangle there. So Teams has identified that there's a problem on the call, and has identified that there's a problem with the network on my side. It's saying, look, we've identified that your Wi-Fi is rubbish. Maybe someone's trying to stream too much Netflix, Tiger King, for example, we recommend that you either move closer to the wireless access point or turn off video where possible, because video consumes a lot of data, right? So we want to try and make the experience as best as possible. And that's a message that the end user will get. And so they'll be able to deal with that themselves. You may be wondering how Teams defines what a poor experience is. Well, there's a few things that happen. The main ones are around audio and round trip time, as well as packet loss. So if you start seeing packet loss of 0.1% or bigger, we know that there's a problem on the network layer. Same with jitter as well. Once it goes above 30, you're going to have those interrupted call problems where people try and start talking over each other. You've got the round trip time and, as I said, the audio degradation average. So that's where things like the microphone is malfunctioning, for example, on a call, and the other people, they basically can't hear you. Teams will notify you of those problems when it detects it. Now, Teams is pretty smart when it comes to packet loss, but back in the day with Skype for Business, if you tried to make a call, especially on a 3G or 4G network, and you started to encounter packet loss, your audio was lost. People couldn't understand what it was that you were saying, right? Now, some of you may have potentially seen this demo played at Ignite. I'm going to play you two audio clips. The first one is a demonstration of approximately 50% packet loss on a call. I'll just play it for you a second.
When you're meeting over a Wi-Fi connection, packets can adversely affect the call experience. In this config network to intersperse us of 300 milliseconds every 100 seconds, corresponding to 50% packet loss.
So very difficult to understand. I'm sure all of you, including me, have experienced that kind of thing on Skype and on Teams as well. So the user's got just poor network connection or network quality. We can't hear what they're saying, right? So we ask them to repeat themselves. The second clip I'm going to play you is some engineering work that the Teams engineers have been working on for a while. Now, this currently isn't deployed as of yet. However, the technology behind it enables Teams and Teams audio to still be understood even up to 50% packet loss. So that's half the packets are not getting through on the network due to a variety of reasons. Maybe they're on a poor 4G network, or they've got poor Wi-Fi coverage. But have a listen to this, and you'll see that the person is still understandable, even at 50% packet loss.
When joining meetings over a poor Wi-Fi or cellular connection, high packet loss can adversely affect the call experience. In this demo, we have configured the network to induce a burst loss of 300 milliseconds every 600 milliseconds, corresponding to 50% packet loss.
There you go. So even at 50% packet loss, audio is still, I mean, to me, that sounds crystal clear. So that becomes vitally important when we're dealing with users who are using crappy Wi-Fi or poor 4G coverage. They're still able to utilize Teams and still able to understand what people are saying during those calls, where other applications may not be able to keep up. That's pretty cool in my books. Just on that too, I mean, most people, and I'm sure everyone on this call at the moment, uses Teams on their mobile phone. I do. I'll be in a meeting and I'll open up the app and I'll continue on the call as I'm going out the shop to grab lunch or a coffee, for example, right? And I find that when I leave the house and I walk along the street, I'll get to the end of the street, and that's right where my Wi-Fi network starts to drop. And so my phone will flip from Wi-Fi to 4G. Now, my experience in the past when it comes to Skype or other technologies is when I flip between one network and the other, so from Wi-Fi to 4G, the call drops. When it comes to Teams, all I get is about 3 or 4 seconds of silence whilst the phone renegotiates on the network, and then I just continue my conversation as is. Continue my video call, continue the presentation, continue taking part in the meeting. So the technology that's been built into the mobile app now allows for users to switch seamlessly from Wi-Fi networks to 4G. Now, I've just explained that in the home scenario, but you imagine that in an office scenario too, where users go from the office Wi-Fi into the lift where network coverage is a little bit questionable, to downstairs to the coffee shop. Pretty sure you probably don't have your corporate Wi-Fi network downstairs in the coffee shop, but that seamless transition from Wi-Fi to 4G is handled seamlessly within the app itself. So again, enables users to be more mobile within the app and do what it is that they do best, which is, work from anywhere. I mean, that's the goal, right? That's what people want to do these days. Same thing happens on the PC as well. Now, I'm not taking the PC up to the shops, of course, but if my home Wi-Fi here suddenly drops out, Teams notifies me and says, hey, you've lost internet. We recommend, if you want to continue on this call, just dial in. There's the dial-in number. There's the conferencing ID. Yeah, all right, you drop out for 30 seconds or so whilst you dial back in. But instead of scrambling around on your laptop trying to get 4G, trying to troubleshoot your modem, you have the option presented to you on the screen straight away on how to dial in and get back into the meeting. That's what users are after. They don't want to have to call the help desk to troubleshoot their internet. They just want to take part in the meeting. And Teams gives you the information right on the screen there. So what about testing our networks? How do we test to make sure that we've opened up the right firewall ports, that our QoS rules are taking, and that people are going to have a good time? Well, there's a couple of tools that I'm sure most of you are aware of. If you're not, highly recommend this first one. This is the Microsoft Network Assessment tool. This does two things. First of all, it'll test your connectivity to the Microsoft Office Edge, which is where Azure Media Services live for Microsoft Teams, among other things. So it will perform a connectivity test and say, I'm having a good experience now talking to the Office 365 Edge, which means that during Teams calls, your users should also have a good experience too. It'll also test firewall ports too. So it will go through that list of IPs and protocols that are required and make sure that your end user's computer or your server or whatever needs to talk to Office 365 is able to do that. I highly recommend running this tool on your internal environment, both on Wi-Fi and cabled network, as well as any user that's working from home that's having those problems, because more than likely than not, their firewall is more than likely blocking some connectivity to Office 365. And this tool will tell you that very simply and easy. So it's called the Microsoft Network Assessment Tool. You can see here that these are the results that the tool produces. So here, this is what I ran on my internal environment here. You can see that the packet reorder ratio has failed on Edge connectivity and my machine talking to the Microsoft Edge. The tool will test both Skype for Business and Microsoft Teams at the same time. So that to me tells me that I've got a problem on my network that I need to address, right? So as I said, if you've got users in your environment that are experiencing problems, definitely do run this tool as a first point of call. Just before we talk about quality of service, we have had a couple of questions come in. So Winston has asked, if users are in the company network, would you prefer to connect Teams via the internet only and not on the company network? Good question, Winston. So as I was saying before, the idea is to connect Teams as quickly as possible to the internet and the Azure Edge media services. So don't route that traffic via your corporate network across a VPN. If your user's working from home and they must use a VPN to access corporate services, make sure that Teams traffic is going from the user's laptop to their router, straight out the internet, avoiding your corporate network and straight up to Office 365. The shortest path possible. Andrew Wong has asked, what are the network implications for customers using both Skype for Business on premises or still online and moving to Teams? Well, Andrew, the good news is, regardless of if you're using Teams or Skype for Business, Teams and Office 365 will use the same port ranges and QoS markings that you've set up for Skype for Business. It will be inherited within Microsoft Teams. So if you've set your network up today to support Skype for Business and you want to move to Microsoft Teams, rest assured that your network is already set up to do so. All right, QoS. Most of you will probably know what QoS is, but it stands for quality of service. What it basically is prioritizing some traffic over other traffic. So, you know, probably in your country how you've got an express lane where some people can drive down that lane if they pay a certain fee, whereas everyone else has to sit in traffic. Or maybe you have a carpool lane where if there's more than 2 or 3 people, you know, in a car, they can get to work a little bit quicker. Well, QoS is a little bit like that. So I say, well, my Teams traffic is more important than your YouTube traffic, and so I will prioritize my Teams traffic over the YouTube traffic. That means that if I'm in a Teams meeting and you're trying to watch YouTube at the same time, my traffic will always be prioritized over yours. So you might have to wait a little bit longer to get your YouTube video of Rick Astley, but me, my Teams meeting will always get priority and I'll get a great experience. In terms of prioritizing that traffic, we always want to make sure that we prioritize audio over video. Audio is probably the most important thing on a call. If the sound's rubbish, people hate it. If the video's rubbish, they can get by. And of course, if file sharing and web browsing and emailing takes a little bit longer, no one's probably going to notice. But everyone notices when audio is delayed. So we always want to prioritize audio on our network over everything else. Now, Teams is pretty handy. It will automatically tag that traffic with a DSCP value. Now, as I said, audio will always take precedent over video and application sharing. Now, by default, in the Office 365 portal, Microsoft Teams will configure those client source port ranges as 50,000 all the way up to 50,059 for Teams traffic. So you don't need to do that. That's automatically turned on and working by default. You may need to, though, in your network, say that traffic that's tagged as EF or expedited forwarding 46 which is all our audio traffic, gets priority over everything else on the network, email, YouTube, you name it. It's number one. When it comes in, it gets in first. It skips the queue, gets priority gold pass treatment. Then, of course, video is a little bit below that with AF41, which DSCP value of 34, and everything below that, your application sharing, file sharing, etc., which, you know, is still important, but not as important as audio and video, gets tagged as AF21 or 18. Now, that may sound like a lot of gobbledygook to you, potentially, but if you give this to your networking team, they will understand this and they'll be able to implement this quicker than you can say Microsoft Teams. And it is vitally important to implement this. I cannot stress this highly enough. Just because you have a lot of bandwidth in your environment does not mean you get to skip the quality of service enablement. Again, you'll end up with networking bursts on your environment when someone tries to copy a 3 GB video file from your file server to their local machine. And if someone's on a Teams call during that time, they're going to get poor audio experience or poor video experience. So be sure to configure QoS regardless of how much bandwidth you have in your environment. I mentioned before that Office 365 by default will give you the starting and ending port ranges. You can change these if you really want to because they're clashing with something else. But for most people, just leave them as default. Just make sure they're turned on as well, and that your internal networking equipment is obviously picking up those changes. One thing I'll point out as well, I don't currently have a slide on it, but there is nothing stopping you from adding those port ranges to your end user's local Wi-Fi router. Now, of course, if you've got thousands of users, you can't expect IT to connect to each and every one. But maybe you might want to jump on the directors or the EA's machines and help them configure this, especially those people that are having problems with their home Wi-Fi because they've got limited amounts of bandwidth and everyone's working from home and everyone's trying to consume content all at the same time. We can prioritize Teams traffic on their home router. I've done it on mine as well. I've added those port ranges on my home Wi-Fi router under QoS. Makes such a difference. It really does. Everyone else in the house can continue to use the internet as they would, but my Teams calls are now flawless. There's no issues with jitter or bandwidth delay or anything like that whatsoever. So I'd recommend taking a look at that as well. Of course, if we want to test to find out the QoS is working, we can do that on our network too. So we can use the Microsoft Network Monitor tool, which is a little bit different than the Network Connectivity Test tool. And this tool will enable us to perform a packet inspection on our network just to make sure that the traffic that's coming across our network has been tagged correctly. So we can see here in this example, traffic coming from 192.168.137.201 has been tagged with a DSC value of 46, which means that QoS marking is working correctly, the network understands it, and it's prioritizing it, which is exactly what we want. So just to close that section off, a couple of things to keep in mind when it comes to Office 365 networking and QoS. The shortest path to Office 365 is always the best. So Winston, that comes back to your question as well. Get to Office 365 as quickly as possible. Don't force people via your corporate network if they don't have to. Of course, security teams do like to lock down ports as well, but doing so may lead to quality degradation. I wouldn't recommend trying to be explicit with locking down Office 365 ports and protocols. If you absolutely have to, please do check out that aka.ms/Office 365 IPs list. Give that to your security team and say, hey, these are the ports and protocols that need to be opened up. And please keep an eye on that list too, because it does regularly change. As I said, any obstacles in between the users are not recommended. Please try not to force users through proxy servers. You're only in for a bad time. And limit the amount of hops that users have to jump through to get to Office 365. 3 to 5 is the best. Anything above that, additional latency, additional times. And you can test that by simply running a trace route to teams.microsoft.com. So you can see that I got there in 4 hops on that screenshot. I use an ISP here called TPG, and TPG quite clearly they have public peering enabled with Microsoft, and so I'm on the Microsoft network within 4 hops of my device, which is exactly what we want. Of course, if you run that test and you see 5, 6, 7, 8 hops, you need to investigate what's on the network that's causing the user to have to bounce through so many different hops. Just having a quick look at the Q&A a second. So Winston has also asked, is the network quality or capacity of Teams Live better than Teams in terms of bandwidth? That's a very good question, Winston, and we're about to just touch on Teams Live events now, actually. So very well timed. It's like you had a crystal ball and you knew. So Teams Live events. What is a live event? Well, you're taking part in one right now. So you're watching a live stream of me present this content. So Teams Live events are very similar to Teams meetings, except the content that you're watching is about 15 to 20 seconds delayed from when I say it, because you're watching a stream that's streaming from Azure Media Services down to your machine. Now, whilst everyone's working from home, that's okay because they're all using their own internet connections to watch a stream. But once you put everyone back into a building in the same place and you've suddenly got 500 to 1,000 people all trying to watch the same stream that's coming from the internet, your internet connection suddenly gets very, very, very congested, right? 1,000 people trying to watch the same content. It would be like 1,000 people trying to watch the same YouTube video. It would smash your internet connection, right? So if you're doing Teams Live events, which will support up to 10,000 people at once, you really should consider looking at what's known as a eCDN or e-content delivery network provider. There's 3 of them there in that slide, the Collective, Hive, and Ramp. What they do is you deploy an agent out to each of your machines on your network. That agent on that machine then talks to a single point of truth somewhere on your network, such as a server or perhaps another machine. And that machine pulls the content down from Azure. And so what you end up with is one stream from Azure Media Services for a live event, streaming down across your internet connection to that one machine. And that one machine rebroadcasts that information across your internal network. So you're not slamming your internet connection. So if you are thinking of running live events within your organization, back when everyone's back to the office and everyone's trying to watch that live event all at the same time, have a look at those eCDN providers. They will save your networking team, your internet connection, and your proxy servers a massive world of pain. Highly recommend it. All right. On to some good stuff. Just keeping an eye on the time as well. We've got about 10 minutes, give or take. I will stop again to answer some questions. Let's have a look at some reporting in Teams. Now, I'm actually going to jump to a live window here a second. I just want to show you how this actually works. So, typical scenario, your help desk gets a call. It's from Joe from accounts, and Joe says, Craig, I've been having problems with my Teams calls. Every second one, the audio quality is rubbish. I hate this rubbish. And then, you know, the headset gets slammed down on the desk or whatever. And it's just not a good time, right? And now, typically, help desk will go, okay, where do we start with this problem? Because, you know, they're working from home, could be anything, right? It's probably their internet, the kids are probably streaming something from YouTube. Wouldn't it be great if we could actually dive in and say, actually, the problem was your headset or the problem was your internet connection and pinpoint it down to where the actual problem was? Well, we can. So I'm just looking at my user profile here at the moment in the Teams admin center, or the TAC, as some people like to call it. So I'm just in the users section here. If I scroll down to the 7-day quality, I can very, very quickly see that most of my calls have a good experience. However, I've got 4 calls there in the last 7 days that have a poor experience. So let's jump into that a second and have a deeper look at what's going on there. So I'm just loading up my call history here a moment. Now this will give me an overview of every single call that I've taken part in over the last 7 days. So I can see here that this conference call between 2 people had a poor experience. The vast majority of these were good, but there are a few down here 3 days ago on the 18th of May that had a poor experience. That was a conference call, had 10 people in it. Well, let's jump in and have a look at that one a second. So again, we're looking at my user profile in the admin center. I'm the user that's called up and had a problem. So we can see that one person on this call had a problem, which was me. Everyone else apparently had a good time though. So let's see what actually happened here. So there's me in the list. I can see that I have had a poor experience. So I'll just open this one up and have a deeper look. We'll find out what the problem was. All right, so we've got some information here. So audio quality, poor quality audio caused by an audio device. That's interesting. So we can see that the device I was using at the time is the Jabra Evolve 75, which is this thing here, this headset. Again, if the user was using their own iPhone headphones, you would actually see this here instead. So, hey Joe, you know, you should be using your Teams headset for calls. Oh, I was. Well, actually, you weren't, because we have, you know, you've got the report right here. But we can do a little bit more than that. Let's dive into advanced and see what the report actually says about this call. So we can scroll down. We can see the headset information, the client information, the speech level. There's our problem. Capture not functioning event ratio. So now that's a mouthful. What that effectively means is that the microphone on my device was not working for 0.007% of the time. So there's my poor audio quality experience. I was trying to talk and there was a problem with the microphone picking up my audio. So there's a problem with the headset there. So we know that just by looking at the report. Of course, if there was a problem with the Wi-Fi network or something else happening, that would appear in these reports here as well. So this gives us a really detailed overview of exactly what's happening on the call and what caused the problem. We can, if we want to as well, jump into the debug mode. So those of you that are used to looking at SIP ladders will be able to jump in here and digest all of the information that's contained within here as well. You can see how long this page is here. So all of the diagnostic information on the call is displayed here. All right. Now, the other place where I like to go to troubleshoot problems with calls is the call quality dashboard. Hands up, not that I can see, but hands up if you've used the call quality dashboard before. I'll put my hand up. There you go. I've used it before. Now, the first time you connect here, it can be a little bit overwhelming. So to access this, all you need to do is go to cqd.teams.microsoft.com. You sign in with your account details. This is just my work account that I'm looking at here. There is a lot of information contained within the call quality dashboard. What's the difference between the call quality dashboard and the Teams Admin Center? Well, the Teams Admin Center is designed to troubleshoot a specific end user who's having a problem, whereas the call quality dashboard is more designed to troubleshoot overall problems with your environment and to get an idea of where problems may lie, potentially with wireless access points or with firewalls or with routers, etc. So Teams Admin Center is user specific. Call quality dashboard is an overall general view of your environment. Now, there's two places that I like to look at specifically within the call quality dashboard. The first one is the reliability reports. Now, the reliability reports has a wealth of information, but one of the things I like to check is how many calls were blocked via a firewall. So this will give you a good indication in your environment of if your firewall is causing problems during Teams calls. So we can see here the amount of calls that have happened. You see some of these days we've had 787 streams. There's quite a few there on that day, but 0% firewall blocks and 0% media failure there, which is fantastic. That means the firewall is letting that traffic through. If you saw sudden spikes there, you know that you've probably missed something with your firewall configuration. So really simple, quick way of making sure your network is performing as expected. The other place that I like to check is the quality of experience report. Now, whilst this report loads, there it is. So this gives you a really good overview of how your environment is performing. So this contains all kinds of information, including when users complete that survey at the end of the call to say how their experience with the call was. So you're able to cross-reference what they've marked the call as against the poor audio quality experience that you can see in the bar chart that appears here. So this one here shows the monthly trend of audio stream quality. So we can see that everything is looking pretty good. The percentage-wise of poor quality experiences is only in the 1 or 2% max, which is great, especially with everyone working from home. So that's exactly where we want to see it. If we start seeing, 30%, 40%, then we know that there's a serious problem. We also see the audio reliability reports here as well about setup failures during calls. They're mainly caused by networking problems again, so keep an eye on those too. Again, 1 to 2%, that's perfectly manageable. And we've got our rate my call responses here as well. So where people have rated the call quality as being very poor, this is what the actual audio quality was like itself. So if you have the opportunity to check out these reports in your environment, please do. The last one I'll show you is the HTTP proxy usage. Now, this one will show you how many people are being blocked via UDP accessing Office 365. As you know, UDP is the preferred method of real-time communications because it's built for real-time communications, whereas HTTP, not so much. Come into here, check the HTTP proxy usage, and make sure you get a no data available prompt here, which is great because it means that no one's being blocked, no one's being forced to use HTTP as opposed to UDP when it comes to connecting to Teams calls. If you see data here, you know that your firewall is more than likely blocking something. All right, just checking the time here. We've got 2 minutes left. So I'll just skip this session here a moment. Lastly, I want to touch on advice for remote workers. As I said at the start of the call, our environment, our working day-to-day lives has changed and has been turned on its head. So we are now dealing with people who are working from home, using their own internet connections, their own devices, and dealing with all those kinds of problems, right? The things that we necessarily don't have any control over. So I've got 3 bits of advice for you on how you can deal with and best deal with users who are working from home or anyone that's working remotely. The first one is, please don't force users via your corporate VPN where possible. Where I said before, hairpinning that data via Office 365, bad idea, don't do it. Let users access Office 365 via their own local internet connection. If you need to configure split tunneling on your VPN, do it. It's the best thing to do for your end users. Secondly, make sure you train your users on what to do when things go wrong. As I said during the Teams experience part of today's session, not everything is puppies and rainbows. Things do go wrong, and Teams will prompt the user and help where it can, but make sure users understand how and when to use those tools, how and when to switch to 4G, how and when to restart their router, and maybe coach them on or assist them with configuring QoS on their home Wi-Fi if they are really struggling. If they tell you they've got a fantastic internet connection, but Teams is a really poor experience, have a look, run the connectivity test tool, configure QoS on their router for them. They'll thank you for it. And lastly, make sure they're using a certified device with Teams. Now, I've got a massive list of certified devices here. This list is regularly updated. All you need to do is plug in the search Teams certified devices. These that I've got here are grouped. On the left, you've got your Teams meeting room devices, probably not so important in the current landscape. However, the personal devices in the middle of the screen there, where possible, ensure that users are using them. So make sure they're using Teams certified headsets, they're using Teams certified handsets where possible, or speakerphone. So I'm talking to you on this thing here at the moment, this a little Poly or Plantronics speaker here. Make sure they're using Teams certified devices. The reason for that is if a user plugs a Teams certified device into their computer, that's all they need to do. Teams automatically detects it and it just works. If they're plugging some, $10 Kmart jobby or Target jobby into their computer, or their little 3.5mm headphones, Teams doesn't automatically configure those. And so they're more than likely generate calls to the help desk because their headset's not working properly. So please, where possible, make sure they're using Teams certified devices. And lastly, don't forget about user adoption. I know our users seem like they're a million miles away at the moment working from home, but it's very, very important that users feel supported and that they know how the software works and what to do when things go wrong. So communicate with them, let them know what's happening. Tell them, hey, now that everyone's working from home, everyone's going to be using Teams, and here's the top 3 things of how to do your job within Teams today. Make sure the technology suits the user as well. Get them those Teams headsets, get them the plug-in ones if they struggle with Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and what have you. Make sure the training is there too, right? So if any users reach out and they need help with specific things in Teams, make sure that your training and support personnel are there to help them achieve, get their job done within Teams. And lastly, make sure your support personnel are also skilled up in how to troubleshoot Teams and the common issues with Teams, and specifically that dashboard I showed you before of going into the user, figuring out exactly what the problem was on the call. The last thing the user wants to hear when they call the help desk is, what's Teams, right? So make sure your support desk is skilled up at the same time as your end users. And of course, if that doesn't work, just send everyone a cake in the post. I like cake. Everyone loves cake, right? Cake solves all kinds of problems. If you'd like to access any of the links today posted in today's session, just go to my blog.chiffers.com/M365May. I will just have a very quick look at the questions here a second. Quite a few have come through. So John has asked, can I collect data, for example, communications within my organization from Teams to do some analysis? So John, yes, you can. There are some tools available in the Office 365 portal under reports that will show you things like team adoption and how often people are using certain modalities within Teams as well, such as, chat, etc. Joseph has asked, how many video participants can you have in a Teams meeting? Well, you can have up to 250 participants in a meeting at any one time, Joseph. In terms of having active videos on screen at any one time, Teams has recently had an update where you can have 3x3 that will appear on the screen now. So you can have up to 9 people on the screen at any one time, actively speaking. Now, I did promise you lastly the QR code for the competition. So there it is there. Just scan that with your mobile phone to enter the competition. I will be picking someone from the list here today who will win a copy of this book. Now, apologies if I haven't had the opportunity to get to your question. I will be reviewing the question list after this session and will be responding to each one of you individually as I can. But thank you very, very much for joining this session today. I hope it was helpful. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about what we spoke about today, just go to my blog.chiffers.com, and feel free to follow me on Twitter as well. I'm pretty active on there. I share a lot of pictures of my cats. I think there's one asleep behind me at the moment on the bed over there. Yeah, so it's @CChiffers. But thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Enjoy the rest of your day.